In early October, US President Donald Trump announced that Hamas and Israel had signed the first phase of a ceasefire agreement. It came into effect on October 10th, almost exactly 2 years after Hamas launched its deadly attack on southern Israel, killing about 1,200 people and taking more than 250 hostages. Since then, Israel's military response, according to Hamas and UN officials, has killed over 67,000 Palestinians. Under the new deal, Hamas agreed to release the remaining hostages, and Israel agreed to release some Palestinian prisoners. The agreement also promises more aid for Gaza, where thousands are struggling with disease outbreaks and starvation. So that's how this looks on paper. But what's the situation on the ground? Just how precarious is it? And can people who've lived through 2 years of violence finally allow themselves to feel a bit of hope? Welcome to The Rundown. When Israel and Hamas agreed to the ceasefire last month, here's a bit of what Prime Minister Mark Carney had to say.
It is a day for optimism. We're encouraged, but it's the first phase, and there's more to come.
So, is the ceasefire holding? What are the chances of a lasting peace? And what comes next? I asked John Allen, former Canadian ambassador to Israel and Spain, and senior fellow at the University of Toronto's Bill Graham Centre for Contemporary International History. John, welcome to the program. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
All right, I want to talk about the ceasefire. Many would describe it as maybe a fragile one. Where are we at right now with it?
I think that's a good description. The ceasefire was supposed to be followed by disarming of Hamas and then a withdrawal of the IDF and a big flow of humanitarian assistance once the hostages, both dead and alive, were delivered back to Israel and once the Palestinian prisoners were released. We're still working. We have 8 deceased hostages that are yet to come back. And frankly, that was expected because it's very difficult to find them all and to gather them all, and many are under rubble. As we know, there was some violence over the last week. 100 Palestinians were killed when 2 Israelis were hit. Hamas, denies that they were directly involved. Mm-hmm. There are clans. There are rebel Hamas. So it's very complicated, and we're just hoping that it will hold.
Many people are probably wondering, how do we call this a ceasefire if there's still exchange of gunfire?
Yeah, well, I think this is to be expected. You've got a situation where the IDF continues to control 53% of the Gaza Strip, and Hamas and these various clans that are there, some of them who are anti-Hamas, are in the other 47%. So you don't have a complete separation of forces. There are still Hamas militants in the area controlled by the IDF. And there's some suggestion over the last couple of days that they're trying to get out, and the IDF and others are trying to figure out how to get them out with the help of the ICRC, the Red Cross.
Let's talk the peace plan. This was brokered by the US. There are 20 steps. We'll get into that. But what is set to take place next? We talked a little bit about hostages. It doesn't seem like it's going to be, once this step is done, this step will happen. It seems like there is a bit of sort of, crossover.
Yeah, there definitely is. The next steps, as I mentioned, are really the disarming of Hamas, because the IDF says they won't withdraw until Hamas disarms. And Hamas says that it's not going to fully disarm until the IDF withdraws. There's now talk, as there was in the peace plan for Northern Ireland, of Hamas giving up its heavy weapons and perhaps retaining its lighter weapons, essentially to defend itself within Gaza. That's a possible option. But the humanitarian assistance is not flowing as much as it should be. It was supposed to be done by the original UN agencies and the NGOs that are on the ground, but there seems to be a problem there as well.
No timelines given for how long this will take. How long before, I think all eyes are really on step 19 and 20, which is the rebuilding of Gaza and the agreement to coexist. Can't really have a rebuild if there is still exchange of fire, but do we have a sense of when they would like this to happen?
Well, the next steps in phase 2 are to bring rule of law into the Gaza Strip, and that was to be done by an international stabilization force. And that was to be done with a disarmed Hamas and a withdrawn IDF. That force is not going to come in while the IDF is still very much in control and ready to start shooting if they have to. We have continuing issues with Hamas, of course. We also want a UN Security Council resolution to bless all this. And then what is supposed to happen is a Palestinian technocratic government is supposed to come in and manage the day-to-day while this oversight board led by Donald Trump and Tony Blair is supposed to provide oversight. So we've got a lot of moving parts, and nothing has happened in terms of that big next step of getting the UN Security Council resolution and getting a force in. Palestinians are being trained, Palestinian police, that's good. So things are happening in the background, but very difficult to see a timeline that you could fix on.
Can you help us understand, the Israeli government approved this plan, as did Hamas. They had looked at the 20 points, they had agreed to it in good faith. Is there any reason why any side would be delaying its
I guess I would question the phrase "in good faith." Bibi Netanyahu was forced to sign this plan by Donald Trump, who had worked it out with various Arab and Muslim nations in New York, and he has his own reasons for wanting to keep those people on side. And Hamas was forced into it by Qatar and Turkey and to some extent by Egypt. I don't think either side would have agreed to the plan themselves, to this plan. We have a situation where Israel hasn't fully achieved its aims. Hamas is still on the ground. They have the hostages back. And Hamas hasn't achieved its aims, which was full Israeli withdrawal and we'll give up our arms. So those two sides are frankly not deeply invested in this thing going forward. It's Donald Trump and the US military and the international community that really wants this to keep going, and Trump and company will have to keep the pressure on if it's going to succeed.
Does that give us, as an international community, faith that this will hold, even if it's being held by, say, the Western powers or Donald Trump's government?
I wouldn't bet your house on it. I think there are many, many obstacles and challenges in the way. I'm a glass half full person, and I desperately hope that it will hold and that we'll move into another phase. I think we have to remember that this is not the end of the Israel-Palestine conflict. What's happening in the West Bank continues. There's settlement expansion. There's settler violence at a large scale. Bibi Netanyahu has made it clear that he's not interested in the two-state solution, which is that point 19 and 20 where there's a pathway to Palestinian self-determination.
You touched on it a little bit. I want to get a better understanding of the involvement of these surrounding nations, specifically Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and the Western governments. You talk about sort of the overseers that Trump will be with Blair, but those three nations, what will they be doing on the ground? So you touched on it a little bit there, but...
Yes. They're going to be monitoring, along with the Americans. They're going to be keeping pressure on Hamas to fulfill its side of the bargain, while Trump keeps pressure on Bibi Netanyahu and the Messianic ministers in his coalition. they are not necessarily going to be a part of the stabilization force. That apparently is going to be Indonesia, Azerbaijan, perhaps the UAE, others, maybe the Egyptians there. I don't think Turkey, because Israel wouldn't have Turkey there. So they're the oversight. They're the ones that we rely on to keep Hamas honest in this. And hopefully they'll be able to succeed.
Why would this plan work when historically none have ever really progressed?
For the same reason that the plan was accepted by both sides, because Donald Trump wants it to work. He's got a huge investment in keeping the Gulf states and certain Arab states, Turkey, on side. He's got huge investments there and wants more. He did get the hostages out, which was part of his agenda, but it's really going to be dependent on Trump staying focused, Witkoff, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, keeping the pressure on. I think we're going to have to hope that there's another election in Israel, and there will.
Has to be before October next year?
Exactly. And if there is an election and if there's another government, then my optimism, guarded optimism, might go up, because I think another government might be more interested in seeing the ceasefire hold and in seeing a Palestinian government eventually come in there and try and rule Gaza without Hamas.
John, we're going to leave it here. Really appreciate it. I'm sure this is a developing story. We will keep in touch and we'll see how the story goes. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
After October 7th, the Globe and Mail's Marcia Lederman began sharing her thoughts about the conflict. The columns she wrote during the first year have been gathered in a new book, October 7th, Searching for the Humanitarian Middle. How has her thinking evolved, and what are her hopes and fears for the future? Marcia, great to have you on the program. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Thank you so much for having me.
I want to start with a quote from your book. It reads, "I thought, whatever I write, whatever I say, I am going to get it. I am possibly going to get it from all sides. It'll be pointed out that I am Jewish, and the argument will be that I'm too biased to write about this. But also, I am a progressive liberal Jew who's already on record as being opposed to the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. I consider myself a humanist and have always desperately wanted peace with the Palestinians and dignity and security for all. It felt inevitable that I would anger people on all points of this tricky spectrum." Now, Marcia, in your previous book, Kiss the Red Stairs, you wrote about your experiences growing up with your parents who were Holocaust survivors. You talk about the intergenerational trauma that came with that. Given all of that, what were your initial thoughts about your approach to writing about October 7th?
Yeah, well, I wasn't even sure if I should write about it. As you just read about, I was, that first shocking weekend, it was Thanksgiving. It was also a Jewish holiday, and it was my son's 15th birthday. So it was, a very kind of happy time at my home. And then I became completely focused on what had happened and what was happening in Israel. And I had, my head buried in my phone constantly while trying to be a not terrible mother to my son having his birthday weekend and trying to find some joy in that. And all I could think about was how much I wanted to write about it, but I wasn't sure, could I write from this perspective? Would that be fair? Could I remove myself from my own trauma, my intergenerational trauma, as you mentioned, and write about these events properly as a journalist? And I was also experiencing that trauma in a way I had never experienced in my life. My son was having a birthday sleepover, and I fell asleep, and at one point I was woken up by a knock on the door, and I thought, they're here, they've come to get me, and that was quick. course, it was one of his friends, but this was, you know, it's a recurring dream that I have or nightmare, that I'm being hunted down by Nazis. And suddenly these Nazis had become the Hamas terrorists who had led these attacks on October 7th. So all of this was happening and swirling. But what I came to finally realize in thinking about it and really speaking with my editors was that I didn't need to remove this historical and contemporary baggage from what I was going to write about it, or even in order to write about it. In fact, it brought something else to the table. So I did write about it that weekend and many, many times since.
Well, give me a sense of how your thinking changed from sort of those first initial columns to sort of a full year. Did it change over that period of time?
Oh, well, so much changed, right? It wasn't even my thinking so much as I was observing these horrors that were going on. And as the war in Gaza got worse and worse, I was no longer writing just as a Jewish person and a child of Holocaust survivors who was responding to this attack on the people of Israel. I was writing as a human being, as a mother watching the suffering in Gaza as well, and thinking about the hostages who were being held and held and held. And I felt like my observations evolved through this time as events evolved, and also that I was able to step back a little from that emotional self that started on, you know, writing on October 8th and 9th, and become more, you know, more of a human being and a journalist witnessing this.
The subtitle of your book, Searching for the Humanitarian Middle. What exactly is that?
Yeah, I was in this space where you know, I'm a member of the Jewish community. I'm also a small L liberal, proud progressive, as you said. But I wasn't agreeing with everything I was hearing from either sort of quote unquote side. And the more I thought about it, the more I kept coming to this idea that I was in the middle. I was mourning the victims of October 7th. I was worried about the hostages. I was also devastated by the destruction in Gaza, and especially the deaths, and the numbers were mounting to almost, well, to unimaginable heights. Tens of thousands of people killed. Um, and I understood the need for the Israeli government to respond, but as things dragged on, I began to see the war as an over-response, and I was disagreeing with the actions of the Israeli government, but at the same time, not writing off Israel as a country that doesn't deserve to exist, or all Israelis as, you know, monsters. And I care for Palestinians. I'm pro-Palestinian, but I despise Hamas. So that's how I came to this feeling that I was in the middle. And then the term humanitarian, which, you know, I realize is, you know, sounds ludicrous when you consider all of the horrible things that have happened. But I kept thinking of myself as being the human before I'm anything else. I'm a human being before I'm a Jewish person. I'm a human being before I'm someone who has family in Israel. I'm a human being before I'm a journalist. And so that's how I sort of came to this idea of being in the humanitarian middle, recognizing and mourning the tragedy on all sides.
I imagine being in the middle means that you are also getting feedback from either side. Can you walk me through some of the feedback that you've received from your columns and from this compilation?
Well, I'll stay away from the feedback that would not be safe for broadcast. But listen, I have received a lot of feedback and continue to. A lot of it is very passionate. People are writing as I was
Hmm.
with their feelings. They are so upset. And they often come to it with from a side as well. And I've had people very, very upset with me from both sides. I've had Jewish people upset that I have um, called out Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government. I have had people who are, you know, pro-Palestinian, but again, I consider myself pro-Palestinian, who have felt that I wasn't hard enough on Israel, and very long missives from
Hmm.
people explaining where they come from, explaining what they were going through. And I was affected, really affected by all of those notes that I still continue to get. Some of them were very, very nasty, and those I tried to dismiss and forget about.
I want to pick up on sort of the climate that we're in right now. Anti Semitism and anti Muslim hate is on the rise. A couple of examples, there was the all girls elementary school in Toronto that had been targeted, the Jewish one that was targeted with gunshots. In Ontario, in Oshawa, a Muslim woman had her hijab forcibly removed during a swarming. There are countless examples on either side of this. And I want to get a better understanding, in your view, what are the consequences of this?
It has been awful. Um, Not only these events themselves, but then being told from an anti-Semitism perspective, this is what I can speak to because, you know, I haven't obviously experienced
Mm-hmm.
anti-Muslim hate, but I see it and it's very upsetting. But then, you know, these events happen and then we're told, you know, it's not really anti-Semitism, it's anti-Zionism. And
Mm-hmm.
I agree. You can criticize Israel and you can criticize the Israeli government, and that doesn't mean you're being anti-Semitic. But there has been a bleeding. There is no question. And then, you know, to be told, oh, you're complaining about this when there's a war going on, I get it. I am very safe here in my home in Canada. I'm not in a war zone, but at the same time, I, as a Canadian, should not have to be subjected to hateful remarks that are based on my ethnicity or race or religion. And I'm saying my, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, I haven't personally been attacked other than on email or online. But the numbers are staggering in terms of what the Jewish community is experiencing and the Muslim community. I, as a Jewish person, I felt almost like I was a repository for people's stories. There was a
Mm-hmm.
point when I was getting, you know, emails almost every day, people telling me these stories that were so upsetting. And I couldn't always write about them. I wrote about just a very few of them, but I was really affected by it. Um, and I want to say that, you know, for the other people, like the bystanders who are seeing this, who are not Muslim or who are not Jewish and don't have to worry about it, um, I think to dismiss it as unfair and to dismiss it as not a big deal feels like gaslighting. And I have to say, of all the people who have reached out to me who are not Jewish about, you know, how I'm doing when there's a terrible event, it's a Muslim woman, another writer who I've never even met in person, but we started an email correspondence after October 7th, who has always been so concerned about how I'm doing. And that has been one little bright light in a very dark time.
This year, Toronto passed a bubble zone bylaw restricting protests around places of worship, daycares, schools in the city. One of your columns, you talk about in the early days protests happening around hospitals. What are your thoughts on targeted protests?
Target consulates,
Right.
embassies, government entities, please do not target houses of worship. That is, I mean, I don't even think I need to explain why that's not right. Please don't target kids' schools. You know, I have great nieces and nephews who attend a Jewish day school in Toronto. And every time I visit, there's a huge command post out there because the security is required. When I went to synagogue here in Vancouver, where I live, for the high holidays, I had to pass through security like I was at the airport. This is not, we're not the ones who should be yelled at or protested. If you want to protest at the Israeli consulate, go ahead, or the American consulate, but please think about it before you make a place that should be safe, a place that feels unsafe.
In your book, you talk a lot about open letters. You yourself write one, and it is directed to Benjamin Netanyahu. What were you hoping to accomplish with that open letter?
Well, I don't think Benjamin Netanyahu read it. I never thought he was going to read it. But it was written out of desperation, anxiety, despair. That's probably the right word. Begging Mr. Netanyahu to stop the war. And I know it's not just Netanyahu, it was Hamas that attacked on October 7th, but they are a terrorist group and he leads a supposedly democratic government. So that's why I was writing to him directly, imploring him to stop the killing in Gaza, imploring him to agree to a ceasefire and to open his heart to a two-state solution, which I believe is the answer to this absolute nightmare.
And here we are another year later. And my last question to you, Marcia, is, what are your hopes for a peace plan?
Depends on the day how hopeful I am, actually. I still believe that a two-state solution is possible. That is my ultimate hope. It's not going to be easy to achieve, but I do think it is possible. It has never been more necessary than since this war began. I think the answer here is for Jews to have the state they were promised by the UN after the Holocaust, and for Palestinians to have the state they were also promised. And the Palestinians deserve their own state, their own land, self-determination, peace and security, and food and education and everything that every person should have a right to. And I would also suggest that Israel cannot be truly free and secure and safe until Palestinians have this too. So that's my hope. It might be pie in the sky, it might be Pollyanna-ish, but I'm holding on to it.
Marcia Lederman, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you taking the time and your insights as well.
Thank you for inviting me onto your show.
Creating a new show is an opportunity, and we want your help. What do you want to know more about? What makes you tune in? And how would you like us to grow? Email us at rundown@tvo.org or shoot me a DM on Instagram and let us know what you think. See you tomorrow.